All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you can be seated, I think we can get going here pretty soon. And we'll give it to Travis.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for coming out. Please, we'll do this at least once, but please give a big hand for Microsoft. This food is amazing. This space is so cool. Thank you so much for hosting us. Okay, this is what I need. This is our cool logo. I got it for 75 bucks on Fiverr. Next slide. We do have a code of conduct, which I could summarize as please don't be an ass to anybody else here. OWASP is a community. We don't want to be mean to each other. We want to be nice and welcoming, and if that doesn't happen, something bad's going to happen. We have a meetup coming up in San Francisco. So basically the way that the Bay Area OWASP is split right now, we're doing South Bay meetings and San Francisco meetings, and we're on a TikTok schedule. So next is going to be the talk. That's in San Francisco, run by my good friends Tad Whitaker and Leaf. So please check that out. They're going to have a great lineup, and Okta is hosting. And I'm not sure if they'll have Microsoft level food, but they will have food. And then we are going to have another South Bay meetup in December, and then everybody goes off and does wonderful things during the holidays, and we'll reconvene sometime next year when we digest all that food we ate. And of course, AppSec California. This is one of my favorite conferences. I think they got the dates right on that, but double check. I didn't put that slide there, so somebody made it for me. AppSec California is great. Two reasons. One, we have good talks. I went through a massive queue today, and the talks this year are going to be the best ever. There's really good stuff, and I had to turn down talks that would have been among our best 2 years ago. So check that out. We've got great training. But the real reason that you should probably be looking to go to AppSec California is because, especially if you can expense it, it is in the most beautiful location on Earth, which is right on the beach in Santa Monica. So you go there, you do some security, boss is happy, you're happy, you come back with a tan, everything's good. We are on social media. I'm not responsible for this, I'm too old, but there are people that are doing social media for us. Please connect in one of these ways if you're so inclined. Hopefully most of you found your way to us tonight on Meetup. And I want to call attention to the YouTube channel because of amazing hosts like Microsoft that are able to record, and a pretty cool vendor that I found recently. We are shooting to have every single talk that people give in our chapter from now on recorded. Which takes me to my next thing. We want to have more speakers, and we want to have the best speakers that we can get. So all of you here, or your friends, or somebody, if you know some amazing talk, I want them to speak. And we are able to work on travel, if that's a thing. If you know somebody in a neighboring state or even across the United States, we can bring them in and have them speak. And now we're going to have all of this recorded. So it's you're building out your resume, and it's all going to go on our wonderful YouTube channel. I'm going to stop talking soon and hand it over to Microsoft. They are gracious hosts, and I'm sure they have some things to tell you. But this is the general flow of the night. We've got 3 great talks, and this is the first time that I've never actually had to do any work for a OWASP meetup. Microsoft came in and they said, we want to host a meetup. And I said, that's amazing, cool. And they said, we've got 3 great talks lined up. And I said, super cool. I don't have to do anything. I just show up and drink beer and relax. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Microsoft and let them take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Travis. Awesome. And thank you all for coming out. Really appreciate it. Really great crowd tonight. We're going. All right. Thank you to the sponsors. Wow, there's a lot of them. Perfect. And us. Applause. All right, cool. Welcome to Microsoft. Thank you all so much for coming out to our Sunnyvale office. We are on all the channels at MSFT Bay Area, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The hashtag that we use for these sorts of meetup events, just to group them all together, and because we love having them, is hashtag MSFT Bay Area Meetups. So feel free to tag us or tweet throughout the night. Just a really quick spiel. We have offices across the Bay Area, San Francisco, Sunnyvale, and some satellite offices in Berkeley with the recent acquisitions. We have 32 different teams across the region, and we are in the Bay Area primarily as an innovation hub, keeping our finger on the pulse of whatever's going on in Silicon Valley. That's the next big thing. Real quickly, our mission, and Satya, who has been our fearless leader for 5 years now, is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. So we're really all in on this mission statement, and all of our products and our culture really embodies what this statement is saying right here. We want to make others look cool, and so happy to have everyone out here tonight. Just a quick little glimpse of our new campus, which will be opening up here in Sunnyvale in next year, summertime, around the August-September timeframe. But that will be our new campus. We'll be putting some of those 32 different teams in here. And we're hopefully going to continue to aspire to empower our own community of employees to get together, use some of the great facilities, collaborate on interesting new products, leverage their, no one likes sitting in traffic, right? So hopefully we'll get some commute options here, and then we can breathe in the fresh, eco-friendly roof. But anyways, thank you again for coming out. I want to introduce our first speaker, who I've been working with really closely. It's Teuta Hyseni, and she will be our first speaker for the night. So thank you so much for coming out.
Test 1, 2, 1, 2. I always want to say that. Okay. Hi, everyone. So today's topic, I chose to speak or to talk about the fundamentals of threat modeling. This topic has different opinions, but I'm going to share my opinions, and I'm going to try to answer some of the questions. Why we use threat modeling, when to use it, what is threat modeling, and then go over STRIDE methodology. I hope that you will enjoy it. So a little bit of myself. My name is Teuta Hyseni. I'm a security engineer at Microsoft. I've been here since 2017. Previous to that, I was application security consultant. I worked in different industries. Previous to that, I was software engineer. And the reason why or the way how I moved to security was kind of not intentionally. I joined because I worked on a company that did a lot of consultant jobs. I joined to help someone, and then quickly I started leading the project because I loved it. It was interesting, and especially coming from software engineering background, it made the transition really easy. And also, so before people had a choice to join this online world, but as we move forward, this is not a choice anymore. We basically, if you want to do, it's a stipulation to exist now, you have to share some sort of information in one of the applications. So to me, as a professional, I feel morally obligated to actually build secure and safe products. So that's kind of the reason behind I feel I'm on a mission. And so I've not switched back to software engineering since then, and I love it. Besides that, I do different talks. I try to give back to community because that's how I learned. I learned using OWASP and all those stuff. So people who contributed to those programs helped me, and so I want to help someone else. All right, so I always like to start. I also host the program of Security Champions, so I would like to start all my meetings with what's going on, because that's really important. As a security engineer, you have to always be updated with what are the threats, what are threats evolving. And I wanted to just quickly go over, as we speak, I think we will have, as I speak right now, there is a IoT device being launched somewhere. That's great, but we always have to be cautious that the more, as much as you know, like the usability of those IoT devices, those are inherently risky, and so we have to think about those things as well. And then we have self-driving cars, IoT. Artificial intelligence. With artificial intelligence, basically we are trying to offload some of our responsibilities to a model, which is great, but then, the fact that it's able to make decision on our behalf is really risky to me, and so I actually have another talk that I specifically like to talk about machine learning, and that's, there is a lot of benefits, but also we have to be really cautious with it. So let's start with what is threat modeling, and I have a fancy definition, but I want to simplify this. So basically, the fancy definition is threat modeling is about building models and using those models to help you identify risk and vulnerabilities. But honestly, I like to simplify things because if you can't simplify it, you don't understand it. But anyway, so simple things. We threat model every day. For example, whenever you make a decision, you think about what's going to go wrong with it. And so that's another, well, we say it's analysis, but that's kind of in security is called threat modeling. So for example, 2 years ago, I decided to do skydiving. I did threat model that decision, but I mean, I had to just accept the risk. But so I just want to say that this is nothing fancier, just a way to call something. And I think it's more than in my opinion, it's really helpful, especially because of this. Threat modeling is designed to look at the big picture of your application, of product. It's not necessarily meant to be focused in one point. You look at your application or whatever product you're working on, and you want to, basically think of what can go wrong with the entire thing. So I love this quote. It says, "You model so you can look at the forest, not the trees," which makes the point that you look at the big picture of the product. So why we use threat modeling? In our world, we have technical vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities typically are caught by different scanners. So, and then we have also logical flaws. And this is where kind of it's where the analysis point comes more handy, because only you as an engineer understand the logic of the application. You can run as much as scans you want. I don't think that scanner will find logical issues, because that's, there is no rule for that. And so this is like kind of to put in perspective, threat modeling is not meant to cut off static scanning or pen testing or dynamic code analysis. Threat modeling basically is meant to, and I will talk in a later slide, but basically it's meant to put your requirements early on the stage of the, the product, like especially on the design phase. So then you baked in your security requirements. And so it's whenever the product is built in, you already have those requirements already in place. So when to threat model, as I said, early on is better for the reasons, and I want to use another analogy. Please don't laugh. So if the product is shipped and you do threat model, is not wrong, but security as an afterthought is hard, because your requirements are going to be patches. Whenever you do threat modeling and you perform all the security analysis within, you move forward, you move to kind of in the same speed as your SDLC, then it means that your requirements and your engineering are in sync up. I want to use the analogy of cutting the cloth. If your security is this afterthought, it means that the cloth has been already cut, and so your requests or your requirements are going to be patches, and the likelihood that there are going to be spots uncovered is really high. So I like to simplify things. I know some people might laugh at my example, but that's kind of like the underlying point that I want to make. So whenever I was a consultant, I did mostly waterfall threat modeling, and that's because of the business, or the nature of the business. I used to, for example, do threat modeling for 50 to 60 services for an entire product and generate like 100 pages of report with all the threats and remediation and everything. And that was not, it's not wrong. It's just then that will be like, it served to be the beginning point, because threat modeling is meant to be a continuous thing. It's a organic documentation. And then if you're lucky and your company has security engineers, that's great, because in the agile world, you don't have to get all fancy up. You are basically assessing feature by feature, and that means that you are continuously doing your threat modeling, building the kind of the entire, you're building the threat model for the entire product. There are a lot of different methods that are used for threat modeling. I'm personally going to talk about Stride because it's something that I use, but there are a lot of other methods that, depending on the needs, there, you know, for example, kill chain or pasta. And I just want to say that processes should not be the one who dictate how you work. Processes are meant to make your let's just say, the entire cycle of a release easier. So you basically adjust needs or requirements of the steps of the process, as you know, depending on what product you work, because sometimes some processes don't really align with what you're working on. So be always like use whatever works for you. So tools, and honestly, you can use whiteboard. And for example, if you move forward, if you move fast in your product, and now there are daily releases, some people work in two weeks sprints. But the problem with whiteboard is that it's not portable. You draw once, but then you cannot really edit on it. And then what probably you will do is take a picture of it, add it to a bug, and then that's going to be there. But you are not going to be able to build up that big picture that I was talking about. I use Microsoft Threat Modeling Tool, or Visio actually is my favorite one, because I actually dictate what I'm going to put there. And so it's just, you know, a way to draw your data flow. So threat modeling in general is aimed to answer these 4 questions. What are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And then did we do a good job? The 4th question, yeah, I will not answer that, but there are these 4 fundamental questions that are aimed to kind of dictate how your threat model works and what is the purpose of it. So the question, what are we working on? So this is really important to me. The first step, getting familiar with what you're working on. For example, if you don't know what feature or what the feature is meant to be, you are not going to be able to ask the right questions, because that's what you're going to do. You have to ask questions about the product. You have to make sure that you cover all the bases. So, for example, in my case, I usually spend time on the documentation to make sure that I already have questions before even I meet with tech leads. So that is really important first step. And then engaging with the right people. It's kind of cheesy, you know, to say what is the right people. But I personally like to, you know, work with tech lead. And the reason being is that the tech lead presumably has the most information, technical details for that particular part. Of course, I work with software engineer and PMs and all those other parts of teammates. But tech lead is my favorite, because he or she has the right, the right amount of information that I need. And then set goals. In the left side, So what I try to cover with this is that it depends on your environment and what you're responsible for. For example, if you host everything, then you're only responsible for the business logic of it. And then the other opposite side, you are going to be responsible for everything in the environment. So you have to, make sure that you have that in as a part of your goals. This step, otherwise, is known as basically setting the scope. And then we go to the most important part: is what can go wrong. So yeah, you break down your system. You draw all the services that that particular feature is going to touch. You make sure that you put all the data types, because this is really important. You have to, in order to be able to find issues, you have to have these details. Draw the boundaries and make sure that you know what other third parties you're using and all the stuff. So the breaking down the system is really important, because that's how you identify issues. And then identifying threat agents and possible attacks. So there is, sometimes people think of threat agents at only malicious users, only non-users of the application. That's kind of like, you immediately think, oh yeah, like outsiders, and then you assume that the user who has a valid account, he's not or she's not malicious. And so that's like, you have to make sure that you list all the threat agents and you build the threat model for all those different agents. For example, non-users, users, software engineers, because you kind of think that you want to kind of do security defense in that, because you don't want to rely on any, usually when you rely on humans, as that's where the weakest link. So, and then understand existing countermeasures if you're working on an existing system. And so the other point that I made, this is like ranking valuable data and resources. So this helps you to build up metrics. For example, you rank your services, which one handle more sensitive data and which not. So then whenever you start prioritizing those issues, you know which services are more sensitive and which one handle least sensitive information. And then the part where you identify exploitable vulnerabilities, and that's where you use STRIDE. So STRIDE stands for Spoofing, Tampering, Repudiation, Information Disclosure, and Elevation of Privileges. And so spoofing. So basically, it's pretending to be someone else. And that's, the countermeasure for that is you use authentication. And so I want to make a couple of examples. Just recently, swim swapping to someone who lost $1.something billion because of, it happens. As I said, the weakest point sometimes is or humans, and then especially like, for example, if you have to deal with customer support, their job is to support, and so it's really hard. If you ever been to DEF CON, social engineering is a really interesting point where they do all these calls. I seen an example where social engineering while playing a baby in the background, so they stress the customer service. So SIM swapping really not like, basically it's just asking for another SIM card. It's not really technical, but still it causes a great damage. And then I want to play this video, if it plays, for a few seconds. Deepfakes, another.
Is anything more sad and lame, contemptible, beneath disdain,
in short, provoking of disgust, than being an impressionist?
a third-rate, even fourth-rate skill? The definition of cheap thrill. Like watching farm equipment rust is watching an impressionist. Relic from a distant day that long since should have died away.
Dishonorable mention. The pit.
Anyway, so it's a long video, but my point is that
Jim Eskin, and I wrote
I
a
don't want
poem
to.
about what it feels like to be an impressionist.
Okay, so the point is that things like that can be misused. Already we have with voice cloning. For example, if you're a CEO of a company, you're going to be publicly speaking a lot and having a lot of pictures taken of you. So what happened is that they basically cloned their voice and they called someone and said, I need $10 million to be transferred to this account. So things like that. Actually, Microsoft and a couple of other companies have already taken a step to invest on this issue where we need to find a way to identify what is fake and what is not. And you can see that this technology is getting really good. So it's really hard to find whether it is fake or not, and especially if you don't think about security. Then we have tampering. Tampering is mostly basically changing data or code. It's concerned with the integrity of the data. And then an example will be just a couple of months ago, someone got a hold of one of the accounts that published under strong password Ruby gem, published a remote code execution code there. So basically, like Ruby, there are so many Ruby applications used, and you will never really think that on one of the Ruby gems you will have this kind of malicious code. But that happened, and thanks to one of the researchers who found, because he was just going through the code for some reason. But that's like basically tampering with the code and making their way up to your application. Repudiation, and this sometimes people this I think like it feels like a lesser issue, but it's basically claiming not to do a particular action. And I'm sure that any of you have at some point experience where you used an application with one account, like admin account, and everyone logged with the same account and did their job with it. So that is really, one of the examples of non-repudiation. Basically, if something happened, you cannot really point what happened and who did it, because you have lack of logs that point out or give more information. So yeah, this is an article that talks about this and what happened if you use one account and you got hacked. How do you go with it? And then information disclosure. This is now widely known, basically leaking sensitive information. It's about confidentiality, and so one of the examples everyone knows, Equifax. I don't want to beat the dead horse, but it was an example that everyone heard about that. And then we have a denial of service, which is concerned mostly about availability and basically making the service unavailable for the rest of the users. And we have another big example in 2016 where major DDoS attack basically caused a major outage in the internet as well. And then we have the last part, elevation of privileges. Basically, this is like elevating your the privileges or something from just a normal user to an admin account, and being able to perform unauthorized actions to the application. This was Spectrum and Meltdown, basically bypassing the user's application restriction to access the kernel memory. And then there are other considerations that are not specified with Stride, but you should all think about these as well. cryptography, data protection, error handling, especially error handling is also a really important part, can cause great damage. And then the third question is, what are we going to do about it? So yes, you prioritize the identified risk, provide remediation and mitigation for those issues. And then if the risk is really high, if you found a really high risk issue, then you add Selenium test or some sort of automated test to make sure that that issue doesn't or is not present in the future. And then that's it. Any questions? Right, yes.
Yeah, we have this security modeling for almost 50 years with, security in OS, relational database, object-oriented database, network, all of this stuff. Now you are talking about threat modeling. Is it, all the definition you have done here is part of security modeling. Is it something different? Can you help me to understand the difference between threat modeling and security modeling, which has been around for so many years already?
Yeah, so, okay, so I'm not sure if I know what the security modeling is. The threat modeling was, I think, actually started at Microsoft. Adam Shostak, he actually wrote the first book. But to answer your question, and I don't know the security modeling, but if that's, for example, if the intent was to analyze, to make like the process of security analysis was to analyze your system as a whole, that's, I think if that's the case, and the intent is the same, I guess threat modeling, I would say it's, at least from my perspective, I use it more for product side, the software side, and maybe the security modeling was for hardware. I don't have background on the security side, but if the intent was to do analysis, I think technically they have the same purpose. Okay.
Thank you. How much of this can be automated by tools? So how much still remains the human part?
Yeah, so here's like the tricky part. You can automate and you can use tools to find technical vulnerabilities, but eventually it will come down to your human intellect. As I said, some things cannot really be automated for this one because okay, think about how can you automate a product owner job, like doing user stories. That's to me, from our perspective, you build up malicious user stories, and then you say, as an attacker, I want to do X. Unless we have some machine learning that is super smart and has our brain, I don't think that this part, it doesn't really work well with automation.
All right, one last question. Someone in the back here. Did you raise your hand?
My question is for threat actors or more in the inside of the company already. It's how would you figure out, okay, this person's here at 3 a.m., they really shouldn't be here at 3 a.m., or they shouldn't be in these files? How do you quantify inside actors?
So that's like insider threats, and it depends from company to company. You cannot really say for an engineer you cannot be in 3 a.m. because I was an engineer. That was the best time that I worked, and so that's kind of like a man. I don't think that. But for example, and there are some companies who have open policy. Everyone has access to everyone, and to me that's kind of you have to think about who has access to what, and then when do they need that access, and if they had access to some point that they did not need. For example, let's just say you give people who are on call, like 1 week, you have access to production because you might have the need to access those resources. But if you don't, if there is no business justification about that, because most of the companies, I believe, they should be, you have to request those privileges, and then you have to put justifications. And then, of course, you have logs, and that's what I was saying. The repudiation is really important. Whoever accessed whatever resource, if there is no business justification and they just had to download the entire production of a product, that, raises the red flags. So I think, as I said, your insider threats are as risky as a malicious user that we never really think of. It's like, oh, that guy there, it's someone who we don't know. But, that's not always the case. Someone, in bigger companies. And so it's always, you have to have data to back it up, whatever you're working on. So that's kind of like my take, even though it's not my kind of expertise, but that's the general rule. Yes?
So this threat modeling is real-time threat modeling or log-based threat?
Real-time threat modeling with log-based. Is it?
Yeah.
Real-time.
Yeah, one last question. Then we need to move on to the next one.
Well, so threat modeling is performed for every, so as I said, you have threat modeling, you perform it as one time. And then you have threat modeling that is attached to your Agile SDLC. So every feature has this analysis that, you go and say, okay, so what are we working on? We're working on the feature upload. What can go wrong with it? Well, if we don't have proper checks on the files, if we don't scan those files, then things can go wrong. So I'm not sure if I am answering your question, but basically it's a for example, what the software development lifecycle is, you attach this process into it.
Is it finding the threat right away and stopping it?
Oh yeah, no. So this is so this is proactive way. This is proactive. This is before even the product exists. This is on the design phase.
Awesome. Thank you, Teuta.
Okay.
Big round of applause.
Awesome, thank you. That was very frightening. So full disclosure, I worked at Microsoft for 16 years, a couple of millennial ago, and I actually worked with Adam Shostak. And I remember when those tools came out, and originally when we did threat modeling, it was a nightmare. And it was a person, and you sat in a room with the team for the entire day and trying to go through and figure out where the security boundaries were and whatnot, and then you would take all that information and put it into RAID at the time, pre-Product Studio, pre-TF. Oh God, I'm feeling old. Anyway, let's get on with this next talk. So we're going to talk a little bit about ethics. If I can make my clicker work. There we go. This is me. I'm Sean. I'm obviously also a little bit of a Disney freak. I've been in the industry close to 20 years. About 15 to 16 years of that has been doing security and privacy work. I've done everything from security assurance, so making sure that the products we're building are as secure as they possibly can be before they go out. I've also worked in the problems where something needs to be patched, that I'm on the team that's making sure those patches don't bring down critical infrastructure. In the last couple of years, I've done a lot of work mostly in incident response, product security. So dealing with the hackers and the researchers and getting those reports and working with the engineering teams to make sure the right things are being done in the right priority. I've led teams, I've worked on bug bounty programs. You might have heard Patch Tuesday, that was a team I ran for a while. Anyone here from Palo Alto Networks? Anyone here from NVIDIA? Okay, good, we're safe. So I'm not speaking for any of these companies, I'm speaking for something else. But I moved down to the Bay Area about a year and a half ago and started running the product security incident response at Palo Alto Networks. And then about 3 weeks ago, moved to NVIDIA, and I'm running the team there to do that as well. So someone asked me how I got started doing this. My former career was actually as a vet tech. I can pill cats, I can give sub-Q fluids, so there's lots of different ways into the industry. And what's a good security talk without pictures of cats? These are mine. We have Izzy. She is fantastic. They're both very big into security. Izzy's kind of our perimeter analysis. She lets us know if there are any squirrels trying to break in through the screens. Can't wait till she figures out she can actually get through the screen, but that's another talk. And then Lily here, who's fantastic at letting us know if there are any malicious leaves that are about to try and break in. So before I give this talk, I kind of went up. I hadn't been to an OWASP meeting before, so I'm like, I wonder if they had a code of ethics or a code of conduct. I'm going to use those two interchangeably tonight, so please forgive me if I bounce back and forth. But this is their code of conduct for their board. And I thought, this is super cool. They're not telling you all the different rules you have to follow. It's kind of the general things. I forget the gentleman's name who said, don't be bad, or as my husband says to my cats, don't be shit. Listening attentively, showing empathy, not speaking recklessly. No one's going to tell you exactly what does that mean. Don't say this word, that word, don't curse like I just did. But we all get the basic understanding of this. One of the interesting things, let me step back. How many of you have to go through code of conduct or code of ethics trainings once a year? Oh, excellent. And you all sit through those videos, and it's either some really bad animation. The one I just took at my new company was really good, but I mean, it's cringeworthy. You're sitting there rocking in your chair going, who the heck would actually do this? Microsoft a couple years ago, I'm not speaking for them currently, but they had a really impressive training. Most of the cases they had were things that had, to some extent, happened, including one in particular where they actually brought a guy back who had not only been arrested, found guilty, and served jail time, I believe, for embezzlement. And they had him as part of it. I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty impactful here. Talk about going off the rails. And there's the proof right there. So who I'm speaking for today is FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. Has anyone heard of this organization? Couple? Okay. Some of your companies are actually members. It's about a 400, 500 group of companies, government certs, private industries, and about 85 of us, what they call liaisons, who are not with a company, but they still let us come and play. It's got a great mission. 3 basic things. One is it works to try and prevent issues. It works to, work together to try and make the world a little more secure place. The second thing it does is provides the trusted relationships so when stuff does go south, you find somebody to reach out to. And maybe you don't know somebody at company A, but somebody on this team does, and since they have trust in them, you can probably have trust in them. So it makes it a little easier when another meltdown specter happens, you can find the right people to reach out to. And you don't have to be a member to take advantage of that. The third thing that we do at FIRST is we provide training and education, not just for our FIRST members, but for the industry at large. One of the things we're doing as part of the PCERT group is we've created a framework on how to build a PCERT team, how to build a program, or how to mature it if you've already got one. So if you're a small company and all of a sudden you have to create the PCERT team and you're going, I don't know how to do this. I was just doing this part over here. We walk you through all the steps. Here are the basic things you need to do. Here's where you need to get buy-in. And then we're providing training, walking you through and places to ask questions. So those are the kinds of things we do. So I got involved. I'm a co-chair of the Ethics SIG. My cohort in crime is Jeroen van der Ham with the Dutch Cybersecurity, I always forget what it calls. Very tall guy. It's great when I present with him because he's like 7 feet tall and it looks like a man has brought his little child onto the stage. I'm kind of glad he's not here tonight. But we've been working on this ethics code for FIRST for about 2 years. And I joined about a year ago and went through and we got it done. Thought, great, we're going to present this, and took it to our board and they're like, you know what? This is actually pretty good. We should consider bringing this out to the industry. So that's kind of part of what I'm here to do. It's not a sales job, but just to kind of inform you of what we're thinking and get your feedback on these things. The cool thing, I think, about ethics, if you think about, there's a great quote, I don't know who to attribute it to, but basically we're all the center of our own ethical compasses, right? We're all pretty decent people. We may run a red light or speed a little bit, but we're not committing high crimes. Hopefully no one in this room is. So we're all the center of this ethical compass. So people who are more ethical than us, suckers, Pollyannas, Dudley Do-Rights, and those who are less, scoundrels, bad guys, black hats. When I first got into the industry about 20 years ago, I got asked to update a report for customers that would make us look better. And it made me feel very uncomfortable. And I had no framework of whether this was the right thing or wrong thing to do. Just had a lot of ACP emails telling me I needed to update this thing. And I was new, and we didn't have a training or a code of ethics or somebody I could call and say, hey, is this okay? I was just told to do it. And so I did. I always felt kind of oogie about it. And it made me very uncomfortable. But we're facing these kinds of things more and more in our industry as security teams, as people who are pen testing and things of this nature. What exactly are we talking about? What are ethics? So this is great. Is anyone familiar with the Markkula Center here at Santa Clara? Excellent. They've got some amazing, they do all kinds of ethics studies in IT and medical and business, and I can highly recommend looking up. They've got lots of great stuff, and it's all open for whoever wants to use it. But basically, it's a group of rules that we've all agreed to that we're going to play nice by, for the most part. And I'm going to read this outright because I don't want to mess this up. Laws and regulations have historically been important instruments for preserving a good life within society. You don't run red lights, you pay your taxes on time, those sorts of things. But today, they're being outpaced by the speed, scale, and complexity of new technological developments, and they're often hard to predict social impacts. So the complexities of what we're doing is getting higher and higher. I think about 20 years ago or whatnot, I left my phone over there because I didn't want it ringing in case my husband wanted to reach me and say good luck. Cameras on phones were a huge deal when they first came out. Oh my God, people are going to be taking pictures of each other in the bathroom. No one knew what was going to happen with that technology. Nowadays, does anybody panic about that? Do you worry about the camera on your phone? There we go, got some shakes, great. Awesome. Just want to make sure you're all still with me. Excellent. So we've got some basics that we agreed to. So vulnerability disclosure. Is everyone fairly familiar with how vulnerability disclosure works? You've got full disclosure, which means I release all my information out. You've got coordinated disclosure, which has lots of different interpretations. But for software, we basically understand the guidelines. We basically know that if you send Microsoft, the MSRC, something, and you tell them it needs to be fixed in 90 days, they're going to work to try and have that fixed in all their products in 90 days, and they're going to give you a CVE, and they're going to release a security bulletin, and whatnot. We all pretty much get that. We understand how that works. But what about with IoT? As we all live around here, I know there are at least 4 different car companies with their little gizmo-whatchits, I think that's the scientific term, driving around my neighborhood. Always makes me a little nervous because I'm wondering if they're recording my speed. What about those vehicles? I don't think Toyota's making every single part of that vehicle. What about the chips in those? What if you end up with a vulnerability that can't be fixed with a software fix that you actually have to replace the chip with? How are you going to do a recall? And can you get all those cars in? Because not on my schedule. And then you've got the vulnerability out there. People know about it. Now what? And then think about it even more so. What if your component is based off of someone else's component, and there's something wrong in theirs, and they're not willing to talk about it? And your component's in the car based off of this? What are you going to do? You've been told you have to keep quiet about this, but people's lives could be at risk. This is why we're starting to think about ethics. As things get more complex for us, We need some guidelines. For anybody who's worked in incident response, it's so much easier to have that framework, to have that documentation, to have that process down before you reach the incident. You know, who am I going to call? Where am I going to set up the room? What parts of this component are in this software and that software? Knowing that information up front allows you to respond more quickly and have it be less of a emergency at that point. But we don't always get it right. And even sometimes when we get it right, we get it wrong. Equifax. Not to beat the dead horse, but the horse needs to be beaten a little bit more. So there's a company called Moody's, and they go out and they rate companies how they think their finances are going to go. This was the first time in history that a cyber event, I think they called it a cyber, okay guys, whatever, actually affected it. They were downgraded to negative. That's a big deal. That is financials. That is the company's wallet on the line at that point. That's going to affect who's going to invest in them. That's going to affect what their stock's going to do for the next couple of months to years. It's going to have quite an effect on the company as a whole. So great, now we're getting hit. Yep. All of these companies, somebody actually got fired, and not just the CEO. People are losing their jobs. Companies are losing money. And it's not just the little guys. Now, I don't know of any cases where someone's gone to jail yet. Maybe somebody can correct me, but that I think might be the next step. But not only do we need to worry about this, now we're needing to worry about vulnerable communities. When I initially started drafting this, almost every day when I looked in the news, there was some new threat that was happening that was affecting folks. So the first one is then when the Guardian's whistleblower site, it's called Secure Drop. And so there was a phishing attack against the site, and they were collecting the information. And so they were able to find out who people were and what they were reporting to the whistleblower site. Not only that, they were really sneaky and advertised this little tool that would make it easier for you to stay in touch with the Guardian that basically took over your phone. So now they knew who all your contacts were, where you were, who you were talking to, all sorts of things. The interesting thing, just a little off topic, when I was looking at this, when you go out to the Guardian's website, no mention of this. None. There's the instructions on how you create your tour and how you work through this, but nothing of, hey, if you created this account, you may want to create a new one. CBC uses the same technology. They use the same secure drop. They had an incident. And on their website, it says, if you created this account prior to May 15th, 2019, you need to create a new one and re-admit with us. And I found that kind of interesting because journalists are really good at protecting their sources, right? That's kind of their bread and butter. But they're not necessarily going to be security experts. They're not going to necessarily know how to frame these things and let people know and make sure everyone's protected. The second case was the Ruby developer who found out that his library was being used by ICE. And he had some ethical challenges with that. Now, I don't know the gentleman, I don't know what happened, but it certainly from the information that came out made it sound like the company and the employee, were not on the same page of what was cool to be done with the code and what wasn't. Just something to think about. Let's see. Just want to make sure I'm not missing any of the fun stuff because I can't read and juggle at the same time. So things are getting harder. First deals with people all over the world. We deal with incident response, so we're dealing with Melter, Spectre, Meltdown, all sorts of things like that, and we have to work together. How can we assume that the trust relationships we have are things that we can continue to build upon and share information? How do we do this as a worldwide organization that includes governments, that includes no red teams, but people who may have different work requirements than we do? So we started coming up with this code of conduct, code of ethics. And And I'm not going to read all these to you, but I'm going to go into one or two of them just to give you kind of a flavor for what we were thinking when we were coming up with this. If anyone who's ever done industry work knows, it takes 4 times longer than you think it should to actually get anything published. So I was hoping to come here and give you a link, and you guys could go out and read it. And of course, it's probably going to be early next year before that happens. The main goal of this was to set expectations with incident response and security teams on what our level playing field was. If you're sending me information, I have to set the expectation with you that, hey, I'm required to share it with other entities, or I won't, those sorts of things. It's made up of 12 what we call duties, and being that it's industry, it's written as should and not must, very important. We're not telling you have to, just a nice suggestion that you should consider. Part of what this is, kind of like the OWASP list, we're not telling you how you have to do these things, what you have to do, but things that you should at least consider, think about before you face these kind of dilemmas. And we'll get into it a little bit more, how it will help you both internally and externally. First one I want to go to is duty to inform. The one thing I love about how we wrote this was it's inform who? It's your constituents. It's up to you to decide and define what that means. Is it just your customers? Is it your partners? Is it your end users? Is it, government agencies? Whatever it is, that's up for you to decide, but you need to think about that ahead of time. Who do you need to inform, and at what time do these things happen? This became quite interesting talk, and the talks are still going on at this point. Keep bringing up Spectre Meltdown, talk about a horse you need to beat. Who got told what when? That's been a very big deal, and there have been a lot of candid discussions about how some of that went by and how do we make sure we're talking to the right people at the right time. I was in a very unique position at that point because I was leaving the MSRC. I had not been redded, so I didn't know any of the gory details, thank goodness. I was going over to Palo Alto Networks. Well, Palo Alto Networks had heard of this, but they're like, oh my God, what's going on? What can you tell us? I'm like, I can't tell you anything. Even if I knew something, I can't tell you anything. You weren't in the chain at that point. So people got very concerned and upset because once those fixes started rolling out, then everybody's customers needed to pick it up and roll it out, and it just seemed to take forever, didn't it? The next one I like is duty to respect human rights. One of the things we tried to do when we wrote this, again, this is originally from a security and incident response team perspective. A lot of the things we do, we may not realize what the long-term results are and who may be affected by what we're doing. We need to think about these things. If you think about the discussions going on with AI and the bias that can be based into these models, these are things we need to be concerned with. There was a talk given a couple of 2 years ago at DEF CON about the machine learning that was being used, I believe, for school teachers in New York State or Michigan State, I forget which one, where because it got a little bit of bad information, it kind of kept spiraling and it was starting to try and fire good teachers because of the bias that had been built into it. It wasn't anything intentional, but it's based upon the information that goes into it. The other thing to keep in mind, especially with incident responders, is team members have access to a lot of information when we're going through incidents. A lot of personal, sensitive, confidential, and we have to be careful how we handle these things. We also have to make sure we're not acting in a biased manner. One of the things, having come from Microsoft, and again, I don't work there anymore, is when you had an incident happen, it could affect different groups of people in different ways. I do recall one of my teammates who years earlier spoke of the amusement when he took down a certain country internet because of a vulnerability that was going on. But the problem was you take down one country, that's awful, but it was protecting a bunch of other folks. So it was trying to weigh out the risks and balances of that. Oh, please don't. Yeah, okay, don't sit on my phone. That's okay, you're fine. Sorry. If it rings, don't tell my husband I'm here. One of the other interesting things about this when we talk about human rights, so a lot of the folks that are participating in this are over in the EU, and they do work with the UN. So they've also talked about the principle of property, including intangibles. So not just, my phone or my purse or whatever, but the ideas and my concepts in general, even if they're not legally protected or patentable. Those are things to consider. These are just examples of what we were thinking about. One of the other ones that I don't have up here is taking care of security team health and productivity. So not just making sure that your folks are trained and that they get time to go to meetings like this and conferences or get the education they need, but also the health of the team. When I started in incident response, it was kind of, it was the firefighters and, we worked all weekend and it was incident after incident. People get burned out. People end up on, having to take time off and the health of your team, you don't want to see somebody who after 18 months is gone because all that training, all that knowledge, all that experience, out your door. So these were things we tried to consider as we were writing this up. So this is our little framework. It's a code in progress. We have gotten the board's buy-off. They liked it, and they said, okay, great. We want you to now make this for the rest of the world. So we're having a copy editor go through and put it in, making sure it's all in one language, so you're not hearing me and Gauss and a bunch of other people speaking in different voices. It's going to be translated into the 6 UN languages, so it'll be in Arabic, Chinese, Spanish, French, and English. It should be up and available probably by the 1st of the year. Don't hold me to that, but that's the plan. And it's available for anyone. If you're starting a new team, if you're at a startup and you need to think about these things, please use it. If you already have one, but maybe you're starting to run into some situations that your code doesn't cover, feel free to use this and go talk to your HR or whoever writes this up and say, hey, these are some of the other things we should be considering. We need to think about these things. The one other thing we did add, and this kind of came in at the end, it was kind of fun. So we're having all these arguments, and each area of every area of the world has a slightly different perspective on things. The folks in the US were very concerned with how we dealt with intellectual property. We had to handle the intellectual property correctly. The folks in the EU is very much human rights and privacy. And while we don't have a specific right of privacy, it is written throughout almost each of the codes, which is really kind of cool. But we would sit here and have these arguments, and apparently they had these arguments the year before I joined, and just kind of dealing with dilemmas. We actually put a little thing in there about how do you deal with dilemmas. If you think about teams and big companies especially, you'll have your marketing team and your sales team trying to sell and do all these things. You've got your red team out there trying to break things. You've got your blue team trying to defend things. Don't always have the same primary goal in mind during the day, right? What happens when your ethics come into conflict? Place that I worked, they were trying to move the red team researchers, the external researchers, in the same organization as the product security incident response team. And that's all well and good, except when you think about I have to build relationships with companies and have them be able to trust me and share information with me as much as they can. And they need to be comfortable that that information is not going to go out to my research and my red team and be utilized inappropriately. So one of the things we came up with is when you have these, first of all, coming up with this is great, because then when you run into that internal debate, you've got something to point to, something to discuss. There are going to be times where all those can't be prioritized. You may work in an industry where there are certain things that have to be done, and that's just the way of the road. That's okay. You can still kind of utilize these things. The other thing, too, is when you have these dilemmas, think about it. Write it out if you can. Not your lawyers. Talk to your lawyers first. Don't ever put anything in writing you shouldn't. But when you document the things you do, like when you document you have an SDL, when you document these are the kinds of things we do. When something goes wrong, and we all know it does, you've got something to go back not only to your bosses and your senior leadership saying, here's why we made this decision. You're also allowing the next group who come in and take over after you going, why the heck did they do this thing? They can go back and see why these decisions got made. And heaven forbid, if it gets really bad, and and you're being looked at by external folks, you can show them, here's what we did, here's what we follow, and here's why we made the decision. Because we're all going to make decisions quickly, especially in incidents. We'll never have 100% of the information, and we're going to make mistakes. By having thought this stuff out ahead of time, you're less likely to make horrific mistakes, and you're more likely to be protecting the things that you care most about. Okay, another minute. We don't have the answers for all the situations. No one can. Everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different. But if you can get your company to agree upon their code of ethics, I do wonder about the one code writer and his company, what was their agreement about how the code would be used? I don't know. But I'll tell you, I start thinking about that a little bit more now when I'm working with the folks I work with and making sure that everything's aligned the way it should be and we're all kind of heading in the same direction, as it were. So to wrap it up, our world's getting more complex. The issues we face are getting harder. And when we get things wrong, it's affecting more people who can't or won't be able to defend themselves. Security teams, incident response teams, really need a code of ethics. They need to think about these things ahead of time to protect their customers, to protect their environments, and to protect us. As Teuta was saying, we don't have a choice anymore. We have to be part of this system. I know very few people who only read books and don't use cell phones, and I know one or two, but most of them are security people, funny enough. But when this comes out, and you'll see we're coming up, there's going to be a website. It's going to have a cool name because, you got to have a cool site to get any attention. Feel free to look at it. And if you see something out there, or you think it's not covering something, let us know. Let me know. I'd be happy to get your feedback. And I think the more eyes that look at this, the better it will be. So thanks. I'm assuming, there's a question?
Question.
Oh, holy crap.
These things are notoriously difficult to write. So which particular decision did you struggle with the most while you were coming up with this code of ethics that everybody can use?
I lucked out because, like I said, they've been working on this for 2 years. And at one point, they lost one of their co-chairs, and they're like, we need help, we need help. And FIRST, like many other security organizations, struggles with diversity. If you look at our board, God bless them, all look the same, except for now one woman. And it's something they realize, and there's something they're working on. So when I said, hey, I'm interested, I don't have a background in this, I'm like, great. And then here I was co-chair. What I found most difficult was just trying to get basic agreement on what we meant. We all want to be able to protect ourselves and what we're doing and make sure everyone else is following the rules the way we interpret them. Anyone who has tried to implement GDPR, my hat's off to you, but you're trying to take a group of rules that are translated by 20 different countries in slightly different ways. It's the same sort of thing. So the fact that after I came in and my Twitter handle is actually Sec Cat Herder, and I herded these cats and got them to agree to this. I think that was I was kind of shocked we were able to do it in about 6 months. So, I'm sorry?
Great work, thank you.
Thank you.
So I was interested about you talking about international, and one of the impressions I get about having been in a lot of different countries is everybody has different values, and you can't really question somebody's values. And so how does values tie into your ethics and coming up with ethics?
That's a very good question, and we had to be very careful. We did not have, in my mind, enough representation as we should have. In fact, there was no one from Asia involved in any of this. So I've reached out to some of the teams over there and said, hey, would you please just look at this and tell me what you think? One guy, at least he's looking at it. It's not going to represent everybody. And that's why I want you all to look at it as well. That's why we tried to write it in a way where it's optional. So even for FIRST members, when we take this to them, it's not going to be a requirement. We wrote it in a way that we're hoping to get maybe 80% of the folks to say, yeah, we can go along with that. And we leave a lot of room for interpretation. I will say, I can't speak a whole lot to it, but we've recently had to remove 1 or 2 members from our constituency because of things that are going on at government levels. It's not that we one-on-one don't have trust in these people, but when the United States Department of whatever says you can no longer do business with this company, we had to step back. So that was kind of in our minds when we were writing this, where we try and make it as broad as possible and open to interpretation, because it's the best we can do. It's the first stick in the sand.
Okay, last question.
I'm actually shocked. I wasn't expecting questions. Thank you.
So how much do you think this can be generalized, because every team, every company is different, every culture is different, and the ethics, the norms can be fundamentally different in different circumstances. Some people say this is fundamentally wrong, the others say this is fundamentally good. So how much do you think you can distill into like a generic set of rules?
It's a great question. And the other thing to think about too is ethics change. You know, you think about back in the old days, responsible disclosure was when you went to the company and gave it to them and they said, go away. And if you talk about it, our lawyers are going to be all over you. And now it's like we have bulletins and we tell you when things are going wrong. Part of it being an international organization is we do have 492 corporate members and 85 liaisons. So while they were not involved in writing this, they are going to be involved in reading it. So we will get that input. You know, I was the only female on the entire thing. I don't say I speak for all women. My mother would kind of be grateful for that. So I think by it going through its next stage where we get the internal review, we will get more of that insight. And then it's going to be open up to the industry to get your insight as well. So it's a first step. Did we get it all right? Probably not. But I think it's a good try. And I think because we need it, we got to start somewhere, you know?
I'm just wondering if the rules of norms and sets, do they actually overlap to the point that if you want to agree that something that fits everyone, you end up with something that's going to be very minimal?
There are some very basic things in here where transparency is important. So there are ways that I can tell you something. If I know that you tell me something, I've got to go and tell my lawyers. There are ways I can communicate that to you without it being in writing necessarily, and that's the kind of transparency we're looking for in our group.
Hey, how are you? Good. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I'm Eddie. I don't have a fancy picture of myself, but these guys, I feel the pressure. Both presentations were fantastic. I've been working with Uber for the past 3 years now. Prior to that, I worked in fintech. I had a short stint with Pandora, just to get the free account for life. Yeah. I mean, it's not as cool as Spotify, I know, but it works, all right? Okay. So, you know, when I joined Uber, I joined the risk management team, and they gave me this project that said, the CISO of Uber wants to do a data-driven security. And I was like, I don't know where to start, because I've never worked in security in my life. So I started reading about it. He gave me a book by Douglas Hobart, and he said, read this, you know? And just page 1, it said, if you care about something, you have to measure it. Yeah. So, what's happening? Sure. Hello? Okay. I sound better. I like the echo. I was very like, who is this guy? So going back, did everybody hear the first part, or should I repeat that due to the echo? You know, when I started at Uber, they gave me this project. They said, hey, we want to measure our cybersecurity. And I said, well, I don't know how to do it. So wrong hire. And then they gave me this book. It was by Douglas Hobart. So I changed the title here, actually, because it was How to Measure Cybersecurity. I don't want him to get pissed at me for using his book title. So I just changed it to an approach because this is my methodology that I'm using right now, guided by all the literature that I've read. But it's a very interesting journey. Like we started with, very little, to be honest, scattered data, all this kind of stuff. And where are we now? Step one. Like everything is a slow slope up to where we want to be. And we are right now at descriptive analytics, which is the very, very, first stage, is collecting data, trying to make sense of it, trying to tell a story, and, trying to sort of organize teams and figure out how to be more efficient, how to do things better. And here's a little bit about what those mean. The difficulty level is lack of historical data. And that's one thing that has to do a lot with cybersecurity. Because when you think about it, right, like if anybody here works in cybersecurity, right, you all have, logs and you have all kinds of stuff, right, that you collect every day. But do you retain that stuff? Maybe not. You discard it, maybe, it's done, we don't care about it anymore, let's move on. Who cares? We solved the problem, we patched the servers, we patched this, we did that. Nobody cares anymore, right? But my approach is different, I care. Because I want to see, what happens throughout history, how we perform, how do we do things 6 months ago versus now. So process improvement, right? When I started at Uber, it was like that. It was very, he said, she said situation, an email, text, talking in the hallways, putting things in the Google Sheets, and nothing wrong with Google Sheets if anybody from Google is here. Actually, my last slide I stole from a guy from Google. Yeah, typical. And so, just a joke. It's not. We're friends. So it was very, it was a lot of noise, right? Like nothing was actually being collected to actually have a sound database, right? And so what I thought about it, I said, okay, well, let's sit down with the users. What are they doing, right? And let's figure out how to collect this data in a more orderly way, in a more organized way, and create these schemas where we store it, and then we can use it down the road and figure out where is our processes stuck? Why are we not performing very well? Why are we not responding to incidents quickly? Why aren't our threat models as efficient, right? So all that stuff, has to be done by collecting information. So the current process, I call it current, it's not anymore, the pros, it gets the job done. Everybody here, if you have metrics or not, you're still doing fantastic, I still use Microsoft. Just kidding. But it works, right? The cons to that is that there's no data collection. It's hard to track. Binary KPIs, that was my favorite. You went to people, you said, so where are you with this process? Not done. Okay. So that means 0. And then when it was done, it was done. So you didn't know where things were stuck, why they were stuck somewhere, what was going on, any of that. The improved process is time efficient. It's standardized across, right? It's very simple to follow. It's data oriented. It gives you non-binary KPIs. I mean, some KPIs will be binary, right? But it gives you mostly non-binary KPIs. Things that are made up, there's a mathematical formula in calculating it, not just like, yes or no, right? And insights are driven by data and narratives. Before, it was just driven by narratives. Somebody told you, hey, my team is doing great. Everybody is happy. We had a happy hour, and we killed that bug, and we're all good, right? Now, you have to actually show, really, how is your team doing? Do you have OKRs? Yes, I do. Do you have KPIs to track these OKRs? Yes, I do. So let me tell you how my threat response team is doing. Let me tell you how my red team is doing, my blue team is doing, how we're handling vulnerabilities. What percentage of those are resolved? How is our backlog looking like? Like all these questions that a CISO should have for their teams are being answered at a slow pace, but they're being answered. Now, common framework, right? So like we thought about this and we started the process, right? Like the most, beautiful part of that was working with people that did not believe in it, right? And especially like people that were dealing with GDPR. they're like, you want to add more work to us? I'm like, no. I said, you keep working, I'll just collect the stuff in the back, I said, you know? Or people that were dealing with putting controls in place, right? They work with engineers. They went to engineers and asked them questions. Is your product tied to our finances, to our financial product? Yes, it is. Okay, we're going to put this control in place. Now, you put all these controls in place, you check all the boxes, and what you usually do is you walk away. Because some auditor comes in and says, yep, control is in place, it's doing great. Wait, how do you know the control is doing great? Right? So we started measuring that. We started collecting information on how these controls were actually performing. And that's how we started thinking about, this has to be the next step. Just having things in place does not mean that you're doing great. Is that correct? No? Okay, good. I like the attitude here. So we sat with teams and we said, okay, let's figure out what are our KPIs. Let's do like a laundry. And I brought a sample here. Percentage of endpoints adhering to baseline standards, high critical vulnerabilities, critical logs, onboarded, controls passing audit. That's what I was talking about. Very bad metric, because that just passed the audit. But then we have to figure out how that is working, right? And so by doing that, we sort of created this attitude towards, let's figure out what are the things that we care about in each team. What should we measure so we can perform better? And to be accountable. This is part of ethics. Accountability down the road allows you to tell a true story, right? And be accountable when things happen, how they happened, how they should have been prevented, what were the signals that you were given by these metrics down the road to warn you, to forecast what was going to happen down the road, right? And so to do that, you need a good data structure and automation, right? We started with the manual sources, the Google Sheets, also using Excel, okay? Excel, yeah, I'm a big fan. And then we started looking at what do we need to collect first, and it's a good way to start. It's a good way to sort of look at the landscape, figure out what's out there, right? And then starting to realize where all these processes that we run, all this data we use Fabricator to collect, engineering tickets and all that stuff, vulnerability tickets. We use Kafka, we use Splunk, we use all these things, right? And all this information is coming in batches, right? And what do we care about, right? So then you start creating these curated data sets that bring you in information that allows you to measure what matters to you, what matters to your teams. And then we wanted to put it in a centralized schema, right? Like in a centralized database where we have all the teams have their tables organized properly, information flowing in automatically, and we can feed that into dashboards where they can actually visualize what's going on a daily basis live. Then we thought about this security framework, right? I mean, this is changing all the time, and everything that I'm talking about is not, this is open for discussion 100% because this is just an approach. It's a way to look at it. And we thought about the baseline security controls, security as a service, trust, and uptime operating costs, right? Where does this thing take us, right? What's the expectation down the road, right? When you're talking to a board of directors or to your leadership team, right? They don't care about the percentage of vulnerabilities, They care about the bottom line. Where do you make an impact, right? If you think about security, companies spend a lot of money into hiring engineers, tools, et cetera, et cetera. And for decades, the only measurement was, we don't have a data breach, we're good, right? And so that was the thing, right? But today you have to show what is the value of each team in the play, right? Like, where do they make an impact? And that impact sometimes is invisible because no one sees what you guys do every single day. No one sees, for example, that those vulnerabilities that you found in the code could have been very costly tomorrow, right? No one sees that that time that you're taking, right? That short time that used to be 10 hours now is 2 because you improved using your metrics. Now that's giving the business ability to move faster, right? We have, for example, in our, we've started the third-party risk management, right? And that's looking at the risk that each vendor has, right? So when you're assessing a vendor, if you're doing it by just talking in the hallway, it's not going to happen, right? But if you're collecting mindful data and you're looking at it and you're scoring vendors and you're creating sort of a risk threshold where you can, navigate, then you're really understanding where you're going to make an impact. How are you going to drag business, right? If you're holding a vendor for 30 days, you might be very costly to the business, right? So bottom line is, what is the business impact that security has? And this way of looking at it allows us to see that. Now, what's the goal of this, right? We want data, data consistency, of course. Stakeholders need to be accountable for this. And one thing that I noticed at the very beginning of the program was that everybody loved dashboards, right? You put a dashboard with graphs, everybody got excited, they looked at it for 3 minutes, and then went back to coding. And I'm like, what happened? Did you look at it the next day? And I would send them an email. I'd be like, I see a spike here. I didn't know what that spike was, because I'm just the data idiot that looks at spikes. And then he would explain to me, he's like, well, this was this, and then I'm like, well, can you just pay attention to these things? I said, because they're happening daily, How about your backlog? I said, it's getting bigger. Why is it getting bigger? Well, I don't know, But then the purpose of the dashboard, I say, is for you to be better at what you do every day. It's not just because it has cute colors and because I made it and it's awesome, So that's what it's there for, right? So that's where we look at stakeholders and we say, be accountable. Look at these things on a daily basis. Make this thing your bread and butter and move your teams forward by being accountable. And all these other parts, repeatability and review and interpretation and action. The last one is very important, I think, because, all of them are kind of important, but this one is important because that's what shows that you really understand what you're measuring and you're utilizing it the right way. If you end up just looking at it and saying, okay, great, I'm going to use this in my OKR meeting to tell my boss that we're 50%. Okay, great. Like, that gets you a pat on the shoulder, a couple of smiles, but you're still not doing the right thing, right? The idea is, are you taking this information and you're acting upon this information correctly? Doing the right thing, taking the right actions, preparing yourself for all that's going to happen down the road. So with these things, we are actually, these pillars are what we show our teams. We've tried to convince them. I think they're convinced. I'm hoping. If they find a recording of this presenting, they'll be like, no, he did it again. But this is something that I stole from the Google guy at the Tableau conference, and I really like it, because this is pretty cool. He was talking about Nest, the Google Nest, right? So he was one of the first guys that worked in the analytics team for Nest, right? And so he did this graph, and I loved it because it tells a lot about how you go from an analyst to a C-level executive, and how do you make that data more digestible, right? And this is the path that we follow, right? So you're at the analyst level, there's a lot of nitty-gritty stuff, right? Like, there's a lot of data, data points, talk about this, talk about that. As you move down here, there's the bottom line, right? You have to take all of those KPIs, all of those, don't take pictures of this and post it online. I'm just kidding. Then I go to jail because of ethics, Who knows what's gonna happen? Yeah, right? Anybody from Google here? Okay, good. No, but this is pretty cool, right? Like, the bottom line is what matters at the end of the day, right? Like, what matters to people that are sponsoring you, that are giving you money to fuel your organization, right? So, with that said, the end, or is it? No, it's not. Well, I'm open to questions. If you guys have any, it'd be cool. Absolutely.
Hi.
Hi.
So when you're trying to build these systems, and I've done it, how did you go about getting the resources to get the tools made so that you're not doing all the manual stuff? Because getting companies to invest on their internal stuff is always quite a struggle.
Get out of my knees, I said, please. No, that's a very good question. Actually, you know, the biggest hurdle, I think, was that. Because selling this to an executive, to the CEO of the company, well, the CSO was already sold because he hired me for that reason. But we had to go somewhere else and beg for money and say, hey, we need to have resources. We need to have engineering time. We need to have, you know, people in data engineering, in IT engine, corp data, all this stuff. We need to engage everybody at a certain level to give us help to create these tools. And I think what we did, we kind of like faked it, right? So we came in with these fake numbers, ethically wrong, no. We looked at studies, right? There's a lot of studies out there. There's the Ponemon study that they did, right, about data breaches and all that stuff, right? And there's a lot of data around, you know, like that's in many, many studies, right? And so we prepared this deck and we said, hey, listen, you know, we know that we are not the money maker here in the house, right? At Uber, we know we're not making money at all. But we said, just give us more. So we said, we're not the money makers here, I said, but you know, here's the thought, right? If you don't have visibility on these things, something will happen tomorrow, right? Regulations are getting tight, privacy laws are getting tighter and tighter, right? But it's not just that. Consumers are getting even smarter, right? And we need to be very, very, you know, aware that today we need to be very accountable. Maybe like 20 years ago, companies didn't care much about if they posted your picture somewhere else, right? But today they do, you know, because there is some sense of accountability. So we said, here is the impact. Here's how this is going to affect you down the road. And here's the dollar figure. And when they saw the dollar figure, they're like, holy shit, okay, take a step back. Here's your resources, limited, not the whole thing. And they said, prove us halfway what you've done could help us, and then we can move on to give you more. I got one more head count last week, so it's good. No, go ahead. Would you like the mic? I can come there.
Thank you very much.
There we go, man.
Yeah, you were talking about data-driven. I mean, you know, I would like to know if you have those metrics already defined, or you are using some tools like machine learning, deep learning, all of this to find those metrics.
That's a very good question, right? So I think the first step in this process, and I think that's more of a maturity level or where we are, right? I think right now, as I mentioned in the slide, right, it's a discovery process, right? So you bring all the business leaders or the team leaders in the engineering security organization that we have, and we talk about what are things that you care about? What are important parts, you know, like how does your neural system look like, right? And like what are the parts that you really care about, right? And then we start thinking about of those things that they care and figure out what metric will suit them better, right? It's a discovery process. And I would think that down the road, especially when it comes down to building KRIs, which is the next level, right? Key risk indicators, we are going to use more of like, you know, simulations, et cetera, using, and I think right now at this stage, we're at the operational metric stage, right? The next one will be something feeding through the operational metrics, mature operational metrics, including some, threat modeling and all that stuff. Build it together and figure out what are the key risk indicators that we can, I mean, that's the ultimate thing, right? We want to build something that is more on the risk management side.
So are you planning to make any of these approaches or tools open source?
I hope so. I mean, I don't know. You know, I mean, that, like right now, if I make it open source, they laugh at me. But down the road, I hope so. I mean, we want to. I mean, there's a lot of material out there. I'll be honest with you. What we are trying to build, it's something that might take a few iterations, right? But there's a lot of material out there. Like, I mean, I was at the fair conference, a month ago. Very interesting stuff. And I encourage everybody, like, that it is in cybersecurity. The biggest myth is we don't have any data. There is data. Start with something, right? Start playing with that, start understanding it, and then you move on, right? You start seeing that, like, it just keeps going, right?
Thanks for the presentation. So we
thank you.
built the multiple dashboard, and we showed we improved a lot. I mean, improved a lot. But every 3 months, the management wants to see something else in the dashboard.
Like
So
what?
it's
Like pictures?
like you,
You can give them my picture. It's kind of I have scarier, you know.
the thing is, we address the CVEs, we address the SOC 2 control, HIPAA controls continuously. But management looking something interesting in the dashboard.
What
So
are they
how to
looking
keep
at?
them, like, what else you can do? Like,
So here's the thing about SOC and HIPAA, right? Like those are very like checkbox kind of thing, right? Like, have we done this thing? Yes, boom, right? Have we done this? So like, you can go through the checklist and say, hey, like, we're halfway through the checklist. They're gonna get bored. What I suggest you do is, right, okay, we've implemented these controls, right? Now start measuring how those controls are doing, right? Because that's a very interesting thing that they've probably never thought about, or if they even thought about, they don't know how to ask about it, right? So all the controls that you put in place for HIPAA, for SOC, for all these things, right? Like I said, those are not things that you put there and walk away. You have to see how they're performing, right? If there is a threat, it doesn't get through because of this control, fantastic. You have a great control. It's like saying, like, you know, if we have a door out there, right, and you put this fancy lock, right, and you bought it for a lot of money, and you go home, your wife says, why did you buy this lock? And you're like, well, guess what? If somebody tries to get in here, will never get in here. And you have this camera at the door and sees, and the thieves try to get in here, and you're seeing them struggling, you can't get in. Then you prove it, you say, look at that. This door lock works, you know? So that's the idea, right? Like you have to show something that what you've put in place is working, because just putting it in place, you know, it's very simple, right? I mean, it's just you go through the procedure and it's done, right? But quantifying how that is performing throughout time, it's actually very important. That's two.
So
3.
I want to ask here.
Where?
I can
Oh,
start
there.
now.
Oh, you're back.
So I want to ask a little more into this. So the approaches or tools that you're building, is it for internal infrastructure or customer-facing apps or for self-driving cars? I mean,
So they're for everything.
everything.
Yeah. So because we have such a multi-dimensional business, we look at, for example, the vulnerabilities that I showed here are for the application, for the app that you use every day.
Okay.
So every piece of code that we deploy, we go through the, you know, the vulnerabilities in the code, the bug, you know, everything, like,
Static
you know,
analysis and things.
jump scooters that you have every day. You know, we measure those things. We see where we are. There's high vulnerabilities. There's medium and lows. There's critical, right? So we look at all of those and we see how good we are in, you know, triaging the situations. But also, we also look at things where we failed, right? Because it's very important, right? Because not every time you know a vulnerability, right? If you had no idea that what you wrote in that code was a vulnerability because you had never seen it before, then how would you deal with it later, right? So we also factor that in, right? And help teams understand, you know, like that is actually adding more strength rather than, you know, making things weaker, right? So it's looking at risk as an opportunity down the road. And it's also, I'm sorry, and it's also figuring out, like, how do we measure security across all these different dimensions that we have. We have not gotten to the autonomous cars yet, but we'll get there, you know?
So is this like all part of secure development lifecycle, or?
Yeah.
Okay. And also like includes pen testing tools
Yes.
and all those.
That's correct.
So do you use any open source tools, or are you building your own?
We don't use a lot of open source tools right now at this very, very moment. We are planning to use some tools that are going to be given to us from different companies that we work with. We're in the process of interviewing them. And I think they're going to add a lot more to what we know right now, to our sort of like database, right? To our knowledge base. Oh.
I think we're gonna let Eddie off the hot seat here, and Travis is gonna.
All right, thank you
say
so
some
much, everybody. I
closing
really
remarks.
appreciate it.
All right, so that's a wrap. Thank you so much to our awesome 3 speakers here in the front. And again, thank you to Microsoft. Great hosts. Make my job super easy. And we do not have to get out of here until 8:30. So if you want to ask more questions of our great speakers, please do that. Network, and all swag has to get out of here. And all those chocolate strawberries have to get out of here too. So thank you so much.